I wanted to ask, it's related to brief, um, because all of you have submitted a proposal. I wanted to know what are some things that you sneaked in to the proposal, like because I heard like things like we are not at the center. For long, we have been obsessed with ourselves, so it's time we kind of also think of other things. There were mentions about participatory processes. I wanted to know each one of you individually, because we all have certain frameworks for our architectural practice, right? And so when you had the pavilion proposal to do, what are certain other things that you kind of sneaked into the into the proposal, into the brief, that were personal to you, and maybe not directly related to either the pavilion or to climate change, but something that is very important to you and you feel like it's something that needs to be talked about more, and you kind of sneaked it into your proposal. So what are those kind of things that you kind of had in it? So
No, like a lot of it is informed by this personal sense of, liking for an affinity for, let's say, bird song. But then all of these just came together and made sense, like logically. And even one of the aspects was like Greta Thunberg being this climate change activist is also anti-war, you know. So that connection really made sense to me because that pavilion then questions our sensibilities as to even like if you're talking about is it just about us, then uh, the patterns of governance, like nation states are not as old as we think they are, like these borders or these hoarding of arsenals. So it like questions each of our roles and positions and locations in society.
Um, for me, it was this idea of totems. Like you have these material objects dying. I think there has been this narrative uh, perpetuated fairly recently in the last 50, 60 years that somehow whatever has a ritualistic connection or a belief connection is somehow bad, to put it at bay, that you cannot have affinities to objects. Like it is always as if I love this object, I like this object. You never believe in objects, which is the way that we work. And then we go out into practice and we curse Vastu and we curse all these things like, oh, it doesn't work for us because I wanted the staircase here and it didn't work out that way. But I think we are letting go. It's a fine line. I want to be very careful of what I speak here because it is not as if I am advocating for all the beliefs that exist out there, but it is also that that connection has some meaning which permeates any cultural association it might have. For example, pots stacked on top of each other might mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but then it has in by creating that in a pavilion space, you are giving room for that belief structure to come back. And that's what I've been interested in for a little while. And I think rain being such a sensuous thing, such a nostalgic thing, such a phenomenon of love, and it scares people. Like people don't have shelter, it scares them. There is an association with the sound of rain, which might be terrifying to some and might be welcome to others. And in that space, how can you create something that has a belief system meaning in it that plays onto these factors was something that was of interest to me.
Anyone else wants to respond? You want to?
Yeah, I think yeah. So I mean, one of the things about the pavilion as an idea, as a idea of thinking of space, is this idea of smudging private property. You know, And in that sense, there's several examples in South Asia where the pavilion has done all kinds of things to not contain space, or to privatize space, because that's what all the examples, even when we talk about the Barcelona pavilion or all the other pavilions, manage to do is they create a container of space, in some ways. So, like I'm just thinking of, say, for example, the Pati in Nepal, which becomes a veranda where people come and sit, and it becomes a community living room, or the Kashta Mandapa, which becomes like a rest house for passers by. And in that sense, it starts framing this idea of the public in a very different way, like this kind of smudged idea of of a gathering of sorts. So maybe if you could just reflect on what is the gathering, because that was also one of the things of the brief, no? What is this gathering that you were thinking of, and how does the idea of the pavilion create this kind of sense of gathering? So if you can just reflect on that.
For whom were you building? किसके लिए बना रहे थे?
Next question.
I mean, that is one of the points we also put down, that the pavilion is a place which opens itself to public and brings together, you know
Yeah. So
in its open and structured form. It allows for uh, absolutely unthought of encounters.
so if the pavilion is like a, it is discouraging enclosures, and smudging the private. So then it has also, it must also reflect our world at large, that a nation state is an enclosure on a scale, no? So if we are talking about erasure of private, then it also talks about a world that is more equal, more blurred in terms of cross pollination of these different actors, different value systems coming in together and making it like a better place to live in. Like a pavilion is a very powerful. There's a lot to learn. They don't litter, humans litter. Like theirs is a very, they nest, they inhabit, they have their own, you know, they have found a way to live without, uh, leaving traces of occupation basically. So there is a way to conduct. Like if you ask me whether it's what, what I'm professing is what I practice, it's not like, but there is a scope to think maybe.
Yeah, Aditya.
So we had also sent an entry, and so while thinking now, we felt that rather than thinking of the pavilion in form of a diagram, if we think of it through an architectural form, not the built form, but an architectural form, we felt that the pavilion as an idea is a completely apolitical form, that like before adding these narratives of culture, materials, or before calling it a monsoon pavilion or a Ganpati pandal, it's an apolitical form. So as an entry, or let's say a design, if we think of it as a let's say a nascent architectural form, we can think of it through various programs and scales, not in just terms of a cultural reunion or union, or let's say community space, but forms that can be explored along scales and even programs, to let's say thinking of it as a bedroom, or thinking of it as a mall, or even thinking of it as a public square, let's say. So that was one of the notion that we came along.
I think what you mean to say is that the uh, I mean, it's don't equate the openness of the pavilion to the the non-politics of it. In fact, it is the openness which is its politics, right? Uh, yeah. Any other reflections, comments?
Actually, just to add to, sorry, just to,
Like what you were saying in terms of you know what that the idea would allow is to open up circulation spaces or pause spaces. But if you reflect on the asking an ontological question to a program itself, the pavilion can help you completely rethink that program, right? Like what is a school, for example, or what is a home, for example, what is what he's saying, right? So I think it's a very powerful idea. The idea of the pavilion itself is a powerful idea to
Do you think it
reach.
comes from the pavilion, or is it already part of the process we explore when we do something? For example, from that lens, if I can extend the argument and be unfair to you, uh, is the pyramid a pavilion? Because most of it is unusable space. Most of it cannot be substantially encapsulated as a sculpture, let's say, because in the Rosalind cross diagram it doesn't fit, right? Then is it a pavilion in that sense because the program has been extended to something else has been tried, or is it just a method of working, and the pavilion is an object that comes from a very specific Western tradition, and all what we call mandaps and things like that, whether that can be sufficiently be called as pavilions or not. I sometimes question that. I'm not too sure what your response is.
I don't think it's a Western concept at all, because a series of spatial ideas of the pavilion, that is the Baradari, for example, just a space with 12 doors that can become a space of performance for, days together, and where people come and go, and, completely smudges the idea of a contained propertied space. The pyramid is a very, it's a tomb, I mean, there's nothing, it's completely programmed. It doesn't allow other things to happen. It's this one space where there's a tunnel that goes in, and there is the sarcophagus at the end of it. So it's a very completely programmed space. There's no other things that happen in it. So I don't think that's the right example. But this whole idea that the pavilion creates ways of living, no? Ways of living which smudges this idea of private property, of permanence. I think that was there in the discussion, of the contained idea of space as an idea that can then be applied to other things, rather than this idea which comes from the Western concepts of pavilion showing off what is new and what is, the norm. I mean, what is the new norm? I
Right.
think if you open up it as a conceptual category of thinking of space, it opens up many ways of doing things.
Yes, and I absolutely agree with you. The point that I am trying to make is that that spatial experimentation, that idea itself was somehow not encoded within the idea of a baradari, the idea of something like a mandap or the street carnival that we have here, or the even if you go to certain European like the Spanish carnivals, it's not as if they are doing active spatial exploration. It is that they are following the ritualistic process, and that is the meaningful part of it, which is my argument. And that's the distinct, maybe that's what exactly what you're saying, and maybe that's the distinction I'm trying to make, that the act of trying to spatially explore something, that diagrammatic approach somehow feels, and I don't mean it in a bad way, it just feels like it's coming from a Western tradition of follies.
No, I mean, I just, if you go back and think of architecture as something that is connected to life, instead of looking at it as a diagram, what is it that that space is producing? What is the life form that it is producing? I think if you ask the question from there, then it allows you to open up various kinds of life forms, because otherwise what you've landed up creating is a contained idea of space and a certain kind of idea of what you can do, what you can't do, zoning spaces and other things, right? But if you just open it up as an idea of thinking of life spaces, I think there's a lot to learn from it. No?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have opened a lot of very interesting concepts and trajectories that this type of the pavilion can take in our practices. And I like Dushyant also tried to suggest something which I had written down, that you know, in the way we today experience the city and like literally city of Bombay, let me just qualify it. Like there are a lot of hidden pavilions, so to say, and they are in the processes of the city. We occupy these margins, fringes, which are the only remains open to us, you know, of space. And so it is very interesting to then draw from them as to what are these slivers of openness that can actually be consolidated and translated into architectural form, which will actually, what you mentioned, bring new relationships, and therefore create new publics, find or produce opportunities of bringing together different sets of people. Because sometimes, and I want to end by this, that you know, in the rains of Bombay, sometimes it is, you know, a very sweet gesture of you having an umbrella and the person who is under the, you know, rain coming running to you and just kind of putting hand across your shoulder, trying to take that temporary shelter. So in some sense the pavilion has come to you, you know. And that is the potential of the pavilion, that it can bring to complete strangers, and pavilion and the rain bringing two complete strangers in a completely unpermanent space, very intimate with each other. So thank you. And I invite you to see the exhibition downstairs, which is called Soft Forms, which is also the bookending exhibition of our decade-long celebration at sea. And we invite you to further celebration. Thank you.